Hey everyone, before this story even finds its breath, let me say this moves fast, hits deep, and ends strong. If you've ever been overlooked, betrayed, or quietly underestimated, this story is for you. Take a second to like, subscribe, and stay connected because stories like this deserve witnesses. Welcome to Black Queen Dominion, where downfall never gets the final word. The year was ending the way it always had for her, with effort poured into everyone else's comfort and dreams while her own waited patiently in the background. She had been the dependable one, the steady presence who believed loyalty could protect her from harm. She believed family was sacred, love was safe, and sacrifice would be rewarded in time. December had wrapped itself in lights and false warmth, but underneath it all, something was already cracking. The betrayal did not announce itself loudly. It arrived subtly through changes in energy, through moments that didn't quite align, through intuition whispering warnings she was too tired to hear. Her sister, the one who had always lived just slightly in her shadow, had been watching closely. Watching her patience. Watching her relationship. Watching her quiet resilience and mistaking it for weakness. As the year's final days unfolded, the truth surfaced without mercy. The man she had invested her hope in did not simply drift away. He was taken by someone who shared her blood, her history, her home. The humiliation was layered, public enough to sting but intimate enough to scar. It wasn't just heartbreak, it was erasure. Family gatherings became stages of silent judgment. Smiles felt forced. Laughter echoed hollow. She did not fight. He did not scream. She did not beg for explanations or closure. Instead, she disappeared. Her absence was not dramatic. There were no announcements, no ultimatums. She simply withdrew. Social media went quiet. Group chats lost her voice. Invitations went unanswered. To those watching from a distance, it looked like defeat. To those closest to the betrayal, it felt like relief. They believed the story had ended with her quietly stepping aside so others could take what was once hers. But disappearance is not always surrender. Sometimes it is preparation. The final night of the year arrived with fireworks and forced celebrations. While others toasted to new beginnings, she sat alone, not broken but stripped down to truth. The truth was simple and painful. She had outgrown the spaces that betrayed her. The love she had given freely had been misplaced, but the strength behind it was still hers. That night she made no resolutions out loud. She made decisions in silence. January was coming, and she would not arrive as the same woman who had been left behind in December. She began with the smallest acts of reclaiming herself. Mornings became intentional. Time became guarded. Energy became sacred. She stopped explaining herself. She stopped seeking validation. She stopped waiting to be chosen. Each day she rebuilt quietly, brick by brick, without witnesses, without applause. What no one realized was that while they were replaying the drama of her exit, she was writing a new narrative entirely. One that did not center betrayal but transformation. One that did not seek revenge but demanded respect. One that would soon make every assumption about her collapse painfully incorrect. As the year turned, she did not look back. She understood something critical in that silence. The people who could betray her so easily were never meant to walk into her future. Losing them was not the punishment. It was the release. January had arrived, and the woman they thought they had broken was just beginning to rise. The shift had started, and the next chapter would reveal what happens when a Black Queen stops surviving and starts winning. January did not announce itself with miracles. It arrived cold, demanding, and honest. There were no shortcuts in her healing, no overnight transformations. What existed instead was discipline. Purpose. A deliberate refusal to remain the woman the world expected her to stay. She rebuilt in isolation, not because she was ashamed but because growth needed privacy. Every morning became a contract with herself. She honored it by choosing consistency over comfort. She learned new skills, sharpened old ones, and redirected every ounce of pain into progress. The energy once wasted on explaining her worth now fueled her evolution. Her glow-up was not cosmetic, though it showed on the outside. It was rooted deeper. In posture, in boundaries, in the way she moved through spaces without apology. Confidence returned not as noise but as presence. She no longer shrank to make others comfortable. She expanded unapologetically. Financial independence followed intention. Opportunities began to align as if the universe had been waiting for her to believe in herself without hesitation. She took risks that once felt terrifying and handled them with steady resolve. Each success stacked quietly, unnoticed by those still clinging to the old version of her. Meanwhile, the narrative around her absence shifted. Curiosity replaced dismissal. Questions surfaced where certainty once lived. The sister who had taken her place began to feel the weight of comparison. The man who believed he had upgraded started sensing loss in ways he could not name. What they had gained came with instability. What she had lost had freed her. She did not seek their attention, but her progress demanded it. Photos surfaced, not curated for validation, but reflective of a woman aligned with herself. Her energy was undeniable. It was not revenge that unsettled them. It was her peace. By mid-January, whispers followed her name again, but the tone had changed. No longer was she the girl who disappeared. She was the woman who re-emerged untouched by bitterness and elevated by truth. The same people who watched her fall now watched her rise without access to the journey that made it possible. She understood something vital during this time. Winning did not require an audience. It required alignment. And alignment had shifted everything. Her sister struggled quietly with the role she had stolen. What looked glamorous on the surface felt hollow beneath. Trust eroded. Insecurity crept in. The foundation built on betrayal could not support growth. And while that house trembled, the one she built alone stood firm. She did not confront. She did not explain. She let contrast do the work. January continued unfolding, revealing the difference between those who chase what is taken and those who create what is theirs. She had become the latter. Her success was not loud, but it was undeniable. Her independence was not performative, but it was complete. As the month progressed, something shifted permanently. She no longer defined herself by what had been done to her. She defined herself by what she had overcome. The betrayal that once felt like the end now revealed itself as the beginning. The woman who vanished in December was gone forever. In her place stood someone unrecognizable to those who thought they knew her. And as January moved forward, the reckoning she never asked for began to take shape, setting the stage for a truth no one could ignore in the chapters ahead. By the time January reached its midpoint, her absence had transformed into something louder than any confrontation could have been. Silence, when paired with growth, has a way of unsettling people who expected collapse. She was no longer present to be measured, judged, or compared, and that absence created a vacuum no one else could fill. Her life had begun to expand beyond the familiar limits that once defined her. New environments sharpened her perspective. New routines reinforced her discipline. She no longer moved with urgency to prove anything. Everything she did was intentional, grounded, and rooted in self-respect. The pain that once sat heavy in her chest had been repurposed into clarity. She saw people for who they were, not who she wished they could be. What surprised her most was how little she thought about the betrayal now. It no longer occupied her emotional real estate. Healing had created distance, and distance had created objectivity. She could finally see the situation without emotion blurring the truth. Her sister had not stolen anything that was truly meant for her. What was taken was already unstable. What was left behind was strength. The ripple effects of her transformation began reaching places she was no longer watching. Mutual connections noticed the shift first. Her name resurfaced in conversations, this time accompanied by curiosity and admiration rather than pity. People wondered how she had recovered so quickly, how she looked untouched by what should have broken her. What they didn't understand was that she had not recovered quickly. She had rebuilt intentionally. Her sister, meanwhile, was learning the cost of shortcuts. The attention she gained came with expectations she could not maintain. The relationship she stepped into carried unresolved tension, guilt disguised as loyalty, and cracks that widened with time. She began living under the pressure of comparison, haunted by the presence of the woman she replaced but could never become. The man at the center of the betrayal found himself restless. What he once perceived as strength in his new situation now felt fragile. Stability was missing. The admiration he had taken for granted was gone. He noticed the absence of peace and didn't understand why winning felt so much like loss. The woman he had underestimated was no longer available for regret or reflection. She felt none of this directly, yet the energy reached her all the same. When you shift internally, the world responds externally. Opportunities began seeking her out instead of the other way around. Doors opened without explanation. Spaces welcomed her presence without questioning her worth. She had stepped into alignment and everything followed. Her confidence matured into something unshakable. It wasn't loud. It didn't demand attention. It simply existed. She trusted herself now fully. She honored her instincts. She no longer ignored discomfort for the sake of harmony. Boundaries were no longer walls built from fear, but gates designed to protect peace. The glow everyone noticed was not the result of revenge or competition. It was the result of self-trust restored. She slept better. She focused deeper. She smiled more genuinely. The woman she was becoming no longer fit into old narratives, and that realization brought freedom. By late January, she had outgrown the need for closure. Closure came from within, not from apologies she would never receive. She realized that healing did not require acknowledgement from those who caused the pain. It required acceptance of the lesson and commitment to growth. And she had done both. The contrast between her life and theirs grew sharper with each passing day. While they navigated tension, insecurity, and quiet regret, she moved with certainty. Her wins stacked steadily, not for show but for stability. She built a life that did not depend on approval, validation, or borrowed affection. What unsettled them most was not her success, but her indifference. She did not watch their lives. She did not react to their milestones. She did not seek reconciliation. Her detachment was complete, and that was something they could not compete with. She had learned a powerful truth. Disappearing was not her punishment, it was her protection. And in that protected space she had grown beyond reach. As January drew closer to its end, the world began to recognize what she already knew. She was no longer the woman who had been betrayed. She was the woman who had transformed. And transformation, once complete, demands recognition whether it is invited or not. The stage was being set for an inevitable realization, one that would force everyone involved to confront who truly lost when she walked away. By the time February approached, the shift could no longer be ignored. What began as quiet curiosity turned into undeniable recognition. Her name carried weight again, but this time it was not attached to sympathy or scandal. It was attached to growth, achievement, and an energy that could not be replicated. The same people who once assumed she had disappeared out of weakness now realized she had withdrawn out of wisdom. She moved differently now. Not rushed. Not reactive. Her presence was calm, intentional, and commanding without effort. She had learned that power did not need to announce itself. It simply arrived, settled in, and reshaped the environment. Wherever she went, she carried the assurance of someone who had survived emotional collapse and rebuilt herself without assistance. Her success had layers. It was not only financial, though her independence was undeniable. It was emotional, mental, and spiritual. She had mastered the art of self-containment. Nothing external controlled her mood anymore. Praise did not inflate her. Criticism did not shake her. She understood who she was, and that understanding grounded her more than any relationship ever had. The glow people spoke about was not cosmetic. It came from alignment. From choosing herself repeatedly even when it was uncomfortable. From letting go of attachments that once felt essential but were actually draining. She had learned that love without respect was not love, and loyalty without boundaries was self-abandonment. The contrast between her and those who betrayed her had become impossible to overlook. Her sister felt it most intensely. What once seemed like a victory now felt like a borrowed life that never quite fit. Every achievement of hers felt heavy by comparison. Every smile felt rehearsed. She lived with the quiet fear of being exposed, not publicly but internally. She knew she had stepped into a role she could not sustain. The man who once stood at the center of her world felt the absence more sharply now. Not because he missed her affection but because he missed her stability. The peace he once mistook for predictability was now revealed as rare. He saw fragments of her life from afar and realized she had not only moved on, she had leveled up beyond his reach. Regret arrived late and uninvited, but it arrived all the same. What hurt them most was not her success. It was their lack of access to it. They could not claim it. They could not share it. They could not influence it. She had built something they were no longer entitled to witness. And that separation was absolute. She had anticipated this moment without consciously planning for it. Healing teaches you to expect nothing but to be prepared for everything. She was not surprised by their curiosity or their discomfort. She had already processed the possibility of their return long before it became relevant. And in that preparation she had made peace with never reopening doors that once led to pain. Her life was fuller now, not louder. She surrounded herself with people who respected her boundaries, celebrated her wins without envy, and understood her silence without offense. She no longer over-explained. She no longer overgave. She understood that reciprocity was not optional, it was required. The woman she had become was not hardened but refined. She still believed in love but not at the cost of self-respect. She still valued family but not at the expense of dignity. She had learned the difference between forgiveness and access, and she guarded that distinction fiercely. Recognition came in waves. Opportunities, admiration, and acknowledgement followed her naturally now. But she did not chase them. She allowed them to meet her where she stood. She had learned patience through pain, and patience became one of her greatest assets. What once felt like humiliation now felt like initiation. She understood that betrayal had forced her to see herself clearly for the first time. It stripped away illusions and revealed her own resilience. Without that moment of loss, she might have remained comfortable in spaces that limited her. Without that ending, she might never have begun. As February neared, she reflected quietly on how far she had come in such a short time. The calendar said weeks, but the growth measured years. She was proud, not in a boastful way but in a grounded, settled way. She trusted herself now more than ever. The past no longer haunted her. It informed her. She carried the lesson without carrying the pain. And that distinction marked the final stage of her transformation. Those who once underestimated her now watched from a distance, realizing too late that the woman they thought they had defeated had simply been redirected. She had not lost anything of value. She had gained herself. And as the season shifted, one final realization loomed. This story was not about betrayal anymore. It was about elevation. About what happens when a black queen chooses herself fully and never looks back. By the time winter began to soften, the story had already written its conclusion. Not in words spoken aloud or confrontations staged for closure, but in outcomes that spoke for themselves. The question everyone silently asked was no longer about what happened at the end of the year. It was about what happened after. And the answer was clear in every part of her life. January had not been a comeback. It had been a confirmation. She stood firmly in the woman she had become, no longer measuring time by pain or betrayal but by progress. The glow that followed her was now permanent, not because everything was perfect but because everything was hers. She had ownership over her choices, her energy, her future. And that ownership changed everything. Her success continued to compound quietly. What she built was sustainable, intentional, and rooted in self-respect. She no longer needed to announce milestones or justify her journey. The evidence lived in her posture, her peace, and the way she moved through the world with certainty. She had become self-led, and that leadership reflected in every area of her life. The people who once doubted her now understood the cost of their assumptions. They had mistaken her silence for surrender. They had mistaken her loyalty for weakness. They had mistaken her patience for permanence. And by the time they realized the truth, it was too late to rewrite their roles in her story. Her sister watched from the sidelines, confronted by a reality she could no longer ignore. The position she fought for brought no fulfillment. The attention she gained came without admiration. She realized too late that she had not taken a crown, she had taken a burden. The woman she replaced had evolved into someone she could never compete with, because the competition no longer existed. The man who believed he had chosen better finally understood what he had lost. Not because he wanted her back but because he recognized what she represented. Stability. Growth. Authenticity. He had walked away from something real for something convenient, and convenience never sustains. His regret found no home with her. She had closed that chapter without leaving a return address. And that was the final victory. She did not celebrate their downfall. He did not need to. Her life was no longer defined by comparison. She had transcended the narrative entirely. Where others remained stuck replaying the past, she moved forward with intention. She had learned that true power is not in proving others wrong, but in proving yourself right. The humiliation that once burned had become irrelevant. It no longer carried emotional weight. What mattered now was the woman standing in its place, focused, fulfilled, and free. She had turned pain into precision, loss into leverage, and silence into strength. Her journey became a quiet testimony to anyone watching closely. Not everyone who leaves is defeated. Not everyone who stays is winning. Sometimes, the one who walks away is the only one who truly understands the value of what was lost. January had answered every question without confrontation. It showed who healed. It showed who evolved. It showed who remained trapped in old patterns. And it revealed who truly lost when the year turned. She had not vanished to be forgotten. She had withdrawn to be reborn. Now she moved forward without resentment, without hesitation, without fear. She had built a life that honored her worth and protected her peace. And she would never again settle for anything less than what matched her growth. This was not a revenge story. It was a restoration story. A reminder that when a Black Queen chooses herself, the entire trajectory changes. What was meant to break her refined her. What was meant to humiliate her elevated her. And what was meant to replace her only revealed her irreplaceability. The year ended with betrayal, but it began with truth. And by January, the outcome was undeniable. She won.